Business School, and I want to say welcome to drboycetv.com. This is the home for intelligent Black people. This is where we speak the truth, and we love to talk about all the issues that matter to our community. And also, we get a chance to speak to the people that matter to our community. And so today, I wanted to let you all know that I'm actually really excited about this conversation because I consider, when you talk about iconic people in Black history, I think obviously about, sorry, give me a second. I think about the Harriet Tubman types, the Frederick Douglass types, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, the great Black men and women of all time. And one of those people that I put on that list is Miss Cynthia McKinney. Now, Miss McKinney, Dr. McKinney, is a former presidential candidate. She was also a member of Congress for many years. But more importantly, she's actually what I call, I gave her a nickname today, and I'm going to lay this out. Maybe we can think about it. AAA, because she has been staunchly, consistently an advocate, an activist, and very action oriented. She ain't somebody that just does the talking, she does the walking, and she doesn't just talk about it, she is about it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Miss McKinney. How you doing today, sister?
I'm doing just fine, but you don't have to call me Miss McKinney. I hope you call me Cynthia, please.
Cynthia. All right. And everybody who's watching, give Cynthia a digital welcome, a digital round of applause, and let her know how much you appreciate the great work she's done. Those of you who have followed her career, have seen her really get on the front lines, really have those hard conversations, fight on the issues that other people are afraid to talk about. And that's why she's special. Or as Dr. Alicia, my wife to be, says, she's one of the good ones. So first off, I would like to ask you, Cynthia, about your book. Now you have a book titled How the U.S. Is it How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries?
That's exactly the way. I know. And people who know me know that I don't use that kind of language. But it was an opportunity for us. The book represented an opportunity for us to take something that was really notorious that our president said and turn it into a learning opportunity. So basically what I did was, here's the book. And what I did was I wanted to set the record straight on how, if the president thinks that African countries and Haiti, some Caribbean countries are shithole countries, then let's discuss how they got that way. And let's discuss US foreign policy. And so that's what we did. And so I put together this book with people from the far left and the far right and in the middle as well, so that we could arrive at a consensus on how these countries came to be the way in which they are. And so I have, for example, I have an introduction from Senator Mike Gravel, who was at one time running for president this time around, 2020. And I have Paul Craig Roberts, who is on the far, I would call him the far right. He was an assistant secretary of the Treasury under Ronald Reagan. And then I have Danny Haifang, who is on the far left. He is a Marxist. He also writes for Black Agenda Report. So what I wanted to do was to really pull together the entirety of the political spectrum and then arrive at the conclusion that, yes, the United States has been so wrong in its foreign policy that it has hurt people around the world. And if you say that these countries are those kinds of countries, here, let me teach you how they came to be. And that's what we did.
Interesting. Okay, so I guess that leads to the obvious question then that we can dive into. And I had some other questions about things I want to ask you about as well in the conversation, because you're so interesting that you're the person that allows for a really rich discussion because almost every segment of your life, and I've read your entire bio from when you were a child, has, you know, these really interesting flashbulb moments. I mean, you were a history maker every step of the way. You didn't waste your time on this earth, and you're still going. And so, but before we get to that, I'd like to ask that obvious question: how does the U.S. Create shithole countries? Like, what's that process?
Well, the United States has a terrible foreign policy. And in fact, if we go to some of the studies that have been done, what we find is that approximately 80% of the face of the United States to the rest of the world is that of a military face. So basically, what the United States is doing is it's sending its young treasure in people, but as soldiers around the world. It's exporting bombs and missiles. It's exporting the kind of violence that Dr. King talked about when he said the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence on the planet. And so this is, and what does this, what we've seen just in the last, oh my gosh, since Libya, what we've seen is the destruction of whole countries. So at one point, the United States engaged in the destruction of whole peoples. If we look at the, and that's not only domestic policy, but we know it's domestic policy too. But if we just look at foreign policy, if we just look, say, at Latin America, if we look at the indigenous peoples of Latin America, what has happened to them, the United States created death squads that targeted the indigenous peoples of Latin American countries. And so basically, the United States was a killing machine, and it supported dictatorships that effected this policy of killing people. And now, with the technology being what it is, the United States does not only kill people, it kills whole countries. And so there's not just genocide, but sociocide. Whole societies are killed, and states are killed. If you look at what Libya had, I had the opportunity to visit Libya several times before Barack Obama implemented the bombing campaign. And basically, there were no homeless people there. I mean, you know, you didn't have people begging on the streets. Everyone had a home, and you had a wealthy country, in fact, such that the Jamahiriya had said that it was going to set aside $90 billion to invite Blacks who live in Europe or in the Americas, and they do not feel as if those places have made them feel as if they were at a home, that they could come back to Africa, come back to Libya, and help build Africa through Libya. And that was the conference that I attended, and that which led to another book of mine, which is The Illegal War on Libya, because I was there. I just happened to be there. And I knew that what the US media were saying about, well, you know, they reduce a whole state of 7 million people to one person. And they do that over and over and over again, so that you then can, if you are sitting on the fence or you don't understand, you can say, okay, well, that guy is bad, and therefore we deserve to go there and do whatever it is that we're going to do. You know, sort of this kind of reductionist thinking as applied to people who lack the information. Well, I had the information, and I felt it was my responsibility to share the information. So again, what did I do? I put together people, this time mostly people who were familiar with Libya and the Jamahiriya, the particular kind of government that they had, which is what we have is indirect democracy, and what they had was direct democracy. And then I put together those people, took some people back there. We were there in the midst of the bombing. And so we were able to demonstrate through our eyewitness testimony that everything that had been put in the media about what was going on, the rationale for bombing and destroying Libya, was actually a lie. So in this book, I wrote the chapter on Somalia. And that's because Somalia was actually going to be the next country that I was going to visit. And I never got to Somalia. So I said, okay, I'll write a chapter on Somalia. Basically, what my research allowed me to discover, remember, there was a time after Siad Barre, there was a time when Somalia had no government at all. In fact, they had no government up until just a few years ago. Now, there was a reason that they had no government. Somalia has oil. And so there was a provision in the original oil contract that was led by Siad Barre that said, if in the event Somalia fails to form a government, then the contract will continue as it is now written. And so Siad Barre said, we've got to have more revenues coming to the state of Somalia, and you, Mobile, and the rest of the, the Seven Sisters, you've got to take less. That is when the agitation began to get rid of Siad Barre. It is true. It was a one-party state, so democracy is expressed in many different ways, right? And so it was an autocratic state. So the Somali people themselves organized and said, we have to get rid of Siad Barre. What they did not realize at the time was that they would be prevented from forming a government, and that there would be, sort of the ISIS, the creation of the ISIS that now has reared its ugly head everywhere would also happen there. That would also facilitate the failure of any government formation. So Somalia basically had, for a period of about 20 years, no government at all. And so the oil leases that had been let under Siad Barre continued. And so there was no redefining or recalibration of how much revenues the state of Somalia would receive. So when we say that Somalia, so now as a political science teacher, you get these textbooks and they say Somalia is a failed state, but they never say why Somalia is a failed state. It's failure by design. And now even the constitution that the Somali state now lives under was not written by the Somali people. And so what they now have is a kind of government that was even rejected by the United States, a confederation of states that can conduct foreign policy. So each of the Somali states can conduct foreign policy, and it's just opened up a hornet's nest. So, and of course it was written by the United Nations and not by the people of Somalia. So if we go through the countries we through in this book, we can see time and time and time again where it was purposeful US policy that led to the conditions in which the people have to live. So now, if the Democrats who say that they are for open borders, and if they are compassionate, you would think that what they would really say is, let's change US foreign policy. Let's allow people to uplift themselves, because honestly, I've been to a whole lot of countries, and I haven't been to a single country where the people don't know what's in their best interest. They don't know how to develop themselves. Unfortunately, the United States doesn't give them breathing room. It's sort of like, Eric garnering the entire world. And so countries are not allowed the independence, the sovereignty to develop themselves.
Wow. Everybody who just came in, I'm speaking with former presidential candidate, former Congresswoman, Miss Cynthia McKinney, Dr. Cynthia McKinney. And we are talking about her new book. Her new book is called How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. which is a great title for a book. And I hope you all will support the sister's book because, and I'm going to deliberately ask you to do that because you're really talking to a history maker. She is somebody that should be in every Black history book that's ever written by Black people in the future. Other people will not put her in their history books because she has fought against their power structure. It is not in their incentive to celebrate her life. It is in our incentive to do that. And that's why I'm doing that today. Do me a favor if you're watching, please hit the thumbs up button. Please hit the share button. Please share this. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe and notification bell so we can have more intelligent conversations. So Cynthia, I want to go back to what you were saying. So when you were talking about how these countries, how the United States, it almost sounds like they go to a cookbook. They got a formula for creating the shithole countries, which could actually be applied to creating shithole cities. They do that, it seems all around the world. When I think about, for example, the destruction of Black Wall Street, you mentioned a couple of institutions that were utilized in the destruction of Black Wall Street, or a couple of weapons, if you will. One was the media, right? You paint a certain picture of the people that you want to destroy, and then the economic warfare that we're always in. In the case of Black Wall Street, it was they have they have money and they have resources. We want those resources, so we're going to use our guns and use our media to create a lie that will then allow us to go in and to take what we want. Well, it seems to me that that's the playbook that's used around the world. You have African countries, you have a Libya that has resources, a Somalia that has resources, and then you use media to paint a picture that's false, and everybody believes it, right? Because especially you're talking about Black people. People will believe any negative, crazy thing you say about a Black person. It's just true, right? So Gaddafi he's a villain, he's this, he's that, or Saddam Hussein, he's this, he's that, right? Or Somalia, same thing. And then at that point, people say, oh, well, you're going to get the bad guys. By all means, here's all the money you want. Use your military. Go and do what you want. And in the meanwhile, somebody's making money out the back door. Somebody's hauling oil and resources and wealth out the back door. And it seems like that's sort of a consistent thing that's done. And I think it's important that you're talking about this. And I'd like for you to feel free to please elaborate on that model, because you're not just a citizen who's speaking on this issue. You're not even just a professor speaking on this issue. You are a professor, but you're not just a professor. You are a former member of Congress. So you've seen the receipts. You've seen these things up close. So can you kind of speak to that model a little bit more? Because I think it's important for our people to really understand how that game is played.
Well, you're right. It is a game. And my dad used to say that it's a game. Politics is a game, but it's a game of life and death. And the sport truly is a blood sport. I would like to introduce this term, limited sovereignty, because basically what we as a community inside the United States, what we experience is limited sovereignty. And we can get into this a little bit later if you like, or on another discussion. But basically what happens in the United States to us is that other people outside of our community end up selecting the leaders for our community. Mm. And then what happens is that we gravitate toward those. I have a Haitian friend, and he just kind of boils things down. So they're white approved. Mm. So we crave in our community white approved leadership. If you get on the cover of Time, Newsweek, if you're on the local news channel a lot, if you're on national news, then you're our leader. That's right. Now, I like the characterization that you made about me of the AAAs, the activist, advocate, and action oriented. Because basically what we have to do is look at what are the actions that come back to our community from this celebrated white approved leadership. And basically what it is that we have limited sovereignty. As long as we go along with with the leadership that they appoint for us, then everything is fine. The moment we say, okay, we're going to effectuate our full independence and our full sovereignty, that's when we have problems. And it's the same in the US foreign policy as the United States relates to other countries around the world. They are allowed limited sovereignty, if they are allowed any sovereignty at all. So basically what we have is a situation where we're all colonized. And then the work that we have to do is to decolonize our minds. Because until we decolonize our minds, there's no way we can really think about being sovereign. And if we can't even think about being sovereign, then what exactly are we doing? And what are we doing when we play the game of politics? So these countries, the countries that are targeted, the countries whose leaders whose names you know, basically those are the leaders who did not accept limited sovereignty. They said, we fought the colonial war, we fought the neo-colonial war, we fought for our independence, we fought for our sovereignty, and so therefore we're going to exercise our sovereignty. And then that's when they have a problem. That's when death squads are created, and the US finances that. The United States does that in Latin America, but they also did it all over Africa. And they do it now in Africa. And that's how you can have, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, you can have a quote unquote rebel movement that threatens the democratically elected leadership. And it only threatens the democratically elected leadership that's actually trying to do something for the people that elected it. It's really, and here's the responsibility that I place on the African American community, because I think that we African Americans are by far the most, we have the power, we have the potential power to be the most powerful entity, Black entity on the planet. But if we don't exercise our full power and reject the limited sovereignty and the white approved leadership that is assigned to us, then we will never be able to lift up anybody else.
So you're saying that we're powerful, but maybe the hesitation comes from the fact that maybe we're not as empowered as we should be. Maybe we're powerful, but don't know our power. You know what I mean? It makes me think about like when my goddaughter was 12 years old, she was the tallest kid in her school, and she was as strong as a grown man. But in her mind, she thought of herself as a little girl. And so, but when she realized how strong she was, she would see a little girl getting bullied, and all the girls were afraid of her, right? So she would just lift the girl up and say, "Get out of here, leave her alone," But it was interesting because when she didn't know how powerful she could be, she didn't use her power in a way that was actually going to help herself or help anybody else. And I think we're kind of like that. We're sort of this big, powerful entity. We've got this 1.3 trillion in spending power. We've got, all this influence that goes around the world, all this education. But if you really talk to us and sort of look at some of our actions, there are some of us who still have yet to really wake up to understand the giant that we can be. Even if we just controlled a fraction of that 1.3 trillion that we get every year, that right there would you can move mountains with that. Is that what you were kind of thinking?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. And, even though I teach in Asia, I give my students a very strong dose of foundation. I start them off day one in the class with Frantz Fanon, Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mass, and of course, Wretched of the Earth. I end up with Wretched of the Earth. But I start with Black Skin, White Mass. And so any colonized people can relate to what's being said by those two. And then of course, the Asian counterpart to Fanon and Freire is, I should say, Jose Maria Cezanne, who is not dead, still alive, and is living in exile. He's a Filipino, but living in exile in the Netherlands. So the three of them, they are sort of like the triumvirate of decolonizing our minds or decolonization thinking. And so I want to give that to my students so that they really are proud, first of all, and not thinking that they have to live up to a Western standard when the Western standard is, oftentimes wrong. Right.
It's that burning house that Dr. King talked about.
Exactly.
I say that to Black folks all the time. You got to really, when you think that white is right and white is better, or that a person who's been embraced by the white community is automatically a successful Black person, you got to realize you've been played. But it's difficult, right? Because we're indoctrinated into that line of thinking from an early age, which is one of the reasons why I really believe that we should be doing all we can to educate our own children, right? So for example, in this platform, when I tell people that you are part of Black history, that you're one of the great women or great people, period, of all of Black history, I mean that. And then also I say that to remind us that ain't no white teacher going to teach your kids about Cynthia McKinney. They don't want your child. My God, can you imagine what the Black community would be like if we had 20 million Cynthia McKinneys?
You know what? We don't even need 20 million. If we could just have about 20, that would
right. If we had 20, then we start winning. Okay? Right. So it's up to us to manufacture our Cynthia McKinneys. We've got to mass produce that. And I relate to that because I get my share of rejection, but I don't even put us in the same class because I look at everything you've done and the consistency that you've done it with. And that's what I love the most about your track record. I noticed your father, Bill, was a cop, like my dad.
That's right.
We both had fathers that were cops, and you got your activist spirit from going to protest with your father when you were young. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's right. And that's also why I, as a child of the South and a child of the Civil Rights Movement, I am very quick to say that I understand and believe in personal transformations. So people who start out in one place don't have to remain in that same place for the rest of their lives. And the Civil Rights Movement was pivotal in too many ways. And without it, of course, there was no way that I would ever have been able to go into the Georgia legislature. In fact, in the grounds of the Georgia State Capitol is a monument, a statue, the name of which is Expelled Because of Color. And it tells the story of the Blacks who were elected after the Civil War to the Georgia legislature, but they were never allowed to be seated because they were Black. And so they were elected according to the rules, and they were expelled by fabricated rules. And so we have to always understand our history. And that's why, we can get into the erasure of this, of the history. I don't want our history to be erased. Change the narrative. Let's discuss the narrative, but don't just pull down my statue, of, what happened during the slave time and Confederacy and all of that, because I think that's an important part of where we've come from and where we never, ever want to go again. So in order to teach that, though, you have to know it. And you can't know it if you have people coming from outside of the South and saying, okay, let's tear down statues, let's erase this and let's do that. Erase my history when you erase Auschwitz, okay? But as long as Auschwitz is standing, you let my history stand too. It's just that important to me. And so, but I do think that we need to deal with the narratives. And we can deal with the narratives if we have reasoned conversations across the political spectrum. So basically, I have this idea from my organizational development, organizational behavior is one aspect of my PhD. So what I decided to do was everything I do now is going to have the mission of going across the political spectrum. I'm not going to talk in an echo chamber. I want to talk to people who are going to give me something back that might be different. And then figure out how it is, because I like your AAA, the action oriented. So now you tell me what your problems are as you see it, and I'll tell you what my problems are as I see them. And then let's sit together and see how we can come up with some solutions that we both can buy into. So that was the why I put together the people that are in this book. It's not just the echo chambers across the political spectrum. So then the second thing that I did, the second time, I call them power cells. And maybe when I come back, when I finally relocate back to the US, then I will work on this a little bit more. But so the second project that I put together was a trip to China. Now, let me just tell you about that, because we literally just got out of China before the lockdown happened. Oh my God. And so that's another story. And actually, that's going to be another book. That's a book in and of itself. But what I did was I put the extreme left, extreme right, or what you call alt left and alt right, put them all together. And we went to China to see if we could beat down the propaganda. Because right now, of course, US policy, actually, one of the ways in which the book is going to end is with a statement by the Attorney General, who said that China is our #1 adversary. So now the propaganda is that we have to hate Russia and we have to hate China. Now, I happen to be in favor of a multipolar world. I do not want a unipolar, this unipolar moment where the United States can go around the world and create these kinds of countries and mistreat other people. I don't want that to happen. So I want a multipolar world. And basically, if you look at it from the backside, if you look at it from the reverse side of the mirror, then basically what we're getting from Trump is a multipolar world, because of the policies, and now Russia and China are together. And in fact, when Obama wanted to bomb Syria, remember how that was prevented. It was prevented, one, because the US military, understanding that the unipolar moment was just about over and that we were going into this multipolar world, that if the United States picks on Syria, which is right next to Iran, we're gonna have some problems, right?
Yep.
Wow. And so you had the military, I think it was General Dempsey, that went to the White House in the middle of the night and said, no, you've got to take this issue to the Congress, and there's got to be congressional debate on this. And that's how that's one way that the unilateral bombing that had just finished in Libya and was going to, because remember, the weapons went from Libya to Syria so that they could go, remember, Wesley Clark said 7 countries in 5 years. So Syria was on that list. Libya was on that list. Syria was on that list. Syria was next in line. Iraq had been dispensed with. So it had been Iraq, it was over. And then Libya, then Syria and Lebanon and Iran, and the rest are coming. There's Somalia, Sudan was on the list, and Sudan was broken. I tried to fight that, but Sudan was broken into 2 countries. I literally witnessed 2 women, one from the north and one from the south. They embraced each other. We were in Ireland for an event. They embraced each other and they cried because their country had been broken. And who did that? The United States did that. That was something that was done under Barack Obama. Wow. So we have hurt people. We have killed people. It's about time that we stop. And I know that I had some Black people say to me, that if Barack Obama was dropping bombs, then it was all right with them. If Barack Obama was going to war, it was all right with them. And I had one very knowledgeable Black woman say to me that Barack Obama was her reparations. So, I have seen so much in the line of what I would just call outright ignorance, that when I was invited to go give a speech in Asia, and I just stayed. I was with students who wanted to learn. They cared about. And in fact, right now that I'm back here, they want me. I'm talking to my students today, and they're begging me to please come back. Because they're afraid that I'll like home. Everybody loves home, and I like home so much that I
Awesome.
will stay here. But anyway, so the coronavirus is my next book. I'm working on it now. The title is When China Sneezes. And what I've got is stories from the lockdown. So I've got US citizens who live in China, and Africans, and of course the Chinese as well, telling their lockdown stories, among other things.
Well,
So yeah.
let me tell you this. You talk about China. I loved when I was over in China. Alicia and I were there about a little bit less than a year ago, and we made it like a very public thing. Because I was really there really to study the economics. We're big on powernomics, and again that sovereignty point that you mentioned. Sovereignty starts partly with positioning yourself to be economically sovereign, right?
That's
and so
right.
when we were in China, I loved going around and really featuring the Chinese entrepreneurs and kind of how things work there, right? And one thing that's interesting too is I remember once I taught a class in China, and when you talk about Asian students being amazing, I remember that the Chinese students gave me a level of respect as the professor that I wasn't used to getting at Syracuse University. At Syracuse University, they used to act like the professors worked for them, like you were their employee, the students did.
Yeah.
Whereas in China, there was just an amount of respect, and it was great because, they acknowledge like you're the elder, like teach
Yes.
us. And then you get rid of all the extra nonsense that might come in the classroom. And it was great. It was a great experience to not just be respected, but to be able to say, okay, now that you trust me to teach you, I can teach you better. I don't have to spend a lot of time teaching you why you should let me teach you. All those little, so let me ask you about this. And first of all, I want everybody to know who's watching. Let me just re-up real quick, and I'll tell all of you guys. I'm speaking with Cynthia McKinney. Cynthia McKinney is a former presidential candidate. She president of the United States. She also, just in case y'all didn't know, and also she's a former member of Congress. And she wrote a new book, and her book is called, somebody please type this in the title because I want everybody to go buy it, find it on Amazon. She's holding it up. It's called How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries, which could be like a lecture series or something. Maybe we can talk about that or something. Because I think I think what you're breaking down is fascinating. And I want to ask you one more thing. You spoke out so many things that a lot of people on this platform speak out about, but it's not so much mainstream sort of stuff because we know how mainstream media operates. I don't even have to explain that to you at all. You could teach us a few things about it. But one of the things you challenged the authorities on, besides 9/11 and besides the Israelis' treatment of the Palestinians, besides Hurricane Katrina, is the assassination of Martin Luther King. I know that there are lots of people who were really curious about that. And I know right now, for example, Who Killed Malcolm X is a big documentary on Netflix. So that's another conversation. And I thought about Malcolm when you talked about the violence we spread throughout the world. Remember Malcolm, one of his most famous statements was the chickens come home to roost, right? And I believe those chickens are still coming. We got a whole lot of chickens that are on their way because we're doing terrible things throughout the world. But with Dr. King, is there a way you could describe to those who are not aware what you've unearthed in terms of what you believe happened in the death of Martin Luther King?
Okay. I'm just writing down academia.com because you mentioned chickens coming home to roost, Malcolm's statement. And I actually wrote a paper about US hybrid warfare. and have the chickens come home to roost. In that paper, which is available under my account at academia.com, and I'm active, very active on Twitter, somewhat active when I'm not in Facebook prison on Facebook, but I just got out of prison.
I bet you stay in Facebook jail. I know I do. That's to me, that's a badge of honor. If you ain't been to Facebook jail, you ain't really talking about nothing real. But go ahead, Miss. Go ahead. Sis.
So actually, I would love to share this paper, because when I was researching, I just couldn't believe. And the United States practices hybrid warfare against these countries. You have what Obama called the kinetic activity, which is the actual bombing. But there are many ways to destroy whole countries without bombing them. And so that would go under the category of hybrid warfare. So for example, you have atomic weapons, you have biological weapons, you have chemical weapons. For example, I went to Iraq about a year and a half ago. And I was there with a group. Everybody came back sick. Why? Because the United States used depleted uranium for how many years? 10, 15 years over in Iraq. And of course, we're seeing the Iraqi people themselves are seeing the results of the depleted uranium with the malformed babies and everything that's going on like that. Exactly what the United States did with Vietnam. Vietnam is in this book because of the Agent Orange that was used. And people today are still giving birth to children that have to be cared for because they are victims of Agent Orange, and that's in Vietnam. So the depleted uranium, which has a half-life of what, 10,000 years or so. So, I mean, this is a problem that's going to be with us for a long time. And the fact that the winds circumnavigate the planet, which means then that if the depleted uranium is in Iraq, it's dropped in Iraq, but it comes back up and the winds carry it. So a recent study was done, and they found, not so recent, a study was done, and they found that the depleted uranium was tested positive for over London. So, we're all getting it. And so anyway, even Fukushima, and we can look at Fukushima. What happened in Japan was that the narrative that we've been told is something completely different. But the dumping of the hot water into the Pacific Ocean, people had better be careful what they eat that comes from the Pacific Ocean. I went to Japan. I refused to eat the fish, right? And I was, I just ate the seaweed, the which is farmed, sort of farmed, not in the that way. So aqua farm. And that is because what it was found was that the seaweed is one of those really high capacity heavy metals attractor that can take it out of your body. That's why some people were able to survive Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And it was because of you have the radiation, and can you survive that? And the way you survive it is by making sure that you get that stuff out of your system, and you're taking iodine and stuff. So anyway, so that is one of the things that we know about. But anyway, these countries continue to suffer generations after the bombs have been dropped. And so then you have this hybrid warfare. So now here's the issue. The question is, if the United States carries out these policies overseas, will they bring them home? What we learned from the Church Committee, which there's several thousand pages, and I've read most of them, is that yes, those tactics that were used overseas they eventually came home. So now we've got them normalized. So the, you know, with the things that the church committee said were illegal and un-American, they are now legal as a result of the Patriot Act. And they've been normalized, even if they're not legal, through the unwarranted wiretapping, so that we take it for granted now. But the NSA is listening to this conversation, they're recording it. And, you know, if something happens, I get into trouble at some point, and they're going to start knocking on Boyce Watkins' door.
That's all right. That's all right. That's a badge of honor. This, you know, I really think that, you know, it's I remember when I was in grad school. It's so funny. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you're such a truth teller, that you just, it's almost like you can't help it. You just got to tell it, lay it out like it is, and tell you. And I relate to that because I remember when I was a kid, my mother used to say, your mouth will either make you great or it will get you killed. I'm curious.
Yes.
And I can just think about, you know, the 90s when we were doing a lot of protests and stuff like that on campus and everything. And I remember my father, who was a cop, you know, like your dad. And I remember him telling me, he said, well, you know that you're probably on some FBI list or CIA list.
Yeah.
And I had to process that a little bit, and I said, well, you know, it's okay. I feel like as a Black man, I was born on somebody's list. I was born on a hit list. You know,
Yeah.
for the time before, they wanted me dead before I was born. So we're living on borrowed time, and the goal at that point, I think, is to make the best use of that time and to clear paths for the people that we care about who are coming behind us. And that's what I think you've done. You know, and I honor you for that. Openly. And I had a meeting that started 8 minutes ago, but I just told him, I said, I need a few more minutes because I'm speaking with Black history. And so everybody, if you could, first of all, I know you got things to do, so I'm going to go ahead and close the interview. But number one, you are invited to come back anytime you want. Okay. I would love to have you come back in and really so many issues. Literally, I think we could just have a lot of conversations on all these issues, and I know people will be listening. I know people are, they love that. They love that honesty. Number two, I want everybody watching, please write down the name of Dr. McKinney's book, or AKA Cynthia. She wants me to call her
That's
Cynthia.
right, Cynthia's book.
Cynthia. I'm not even gonna say Miss Cynthia. Cynthia's book is called How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. Everybody, please support. Don't just watch. Put this on your social media. Put the name of her book out there. How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. Because remember, if we don't support our own and those we believe in, nobody will. Cynthia has pretty much kicked away the mainstream. She could have easily sat up there, you know, on Capitol Hill with some of those Congressional Black Caucus members that we love to talk. One day I'm gonna ask you about that. And, you know, okay. But she didn't. She fought for you. You know, has been fighting consistently. And those of you who know, you already know. Those who don't know, now you know, and you need to know more. So go do your research and study that. Last but not least, if you could join me in giving Cynthia a digital round of applause and a digital thank you. For sharing your time. I can just tell you, I appreciate it immensely. It was so, when I heard that they were booking you to come in, I was really excited because I think that what you've been doing is great. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the next time.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right. So everybody, this is Miss Cynthia McKinney. She's former Congresswoman. She is a professor of political science. What's your area that you?
Well, actually, I teach MBA students, so I'm in the business school.
Okay. So she's a professor in the business school at a school in is it in Bangladesh?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, and also she ran for president. Was it the Libertarian Party? It was Libertarian Green Party. I knew it was one of the two. And for the Green Party, and she's just a great Black woman who has a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts, and we're going to have her back at some point in the near future because there's a whole lot more to talk about. So thank you very much, Dr. McKinney. Cynthia. Thank you Cynthia, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Everybody, you guys have a wonderful day. Please hit the thumbs up button, share and subscribe button on your way out. And we will see you guys soon. So take care. Have a great day. Thanks a lot, Cynthia.
Bye-bye.